FIFA President Sepp Blatter gave South Africa 9 out of 10 for the way South Africa hosted the 2010 World Cup. Is this what we expected? But what is our report card for FIFA? To shed some light on the subject, we have Paul Bannister, custodian of Brand South Africa, Michael Goldman from GIBS and Rob Smuts from RMS Media. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the show. I'm going to start with you, Paul. How exactly would you rate Brand FIFA?
Brand FIFA. You know, it's such an interesting thing because Brand FIFA, if I had to put them on a report card, you can know nothing more efficient than the FIFA organization. Quite extraordinary. And if you look through how they've organized this event right through, they've got it topped. But I'm going to mark them down a little bit. Number one, I think they didn't manage the ambush marketing incident terribly well. In fact, as a consequence of their rather heavy-handed approach, they gave that Bavarian beer far more mileage than it would ever have got, which I think is interesting. I think their ticketing system left a little bit to be desired in terms of its accessibility. They're going to learn that for Brazil, that they need to actually make it more approachable, more accessible when internet broadband isn't so accessible there. I think they got some of their pricing wrong. Their boxes were overpriced, so you saw a lot of times the tickets in the boxes were actually empty. I think restriction on some of the vending in the stadiums lost some of our culture. So giving us rather bland fare, to me, lost some of that South African culture, which I think was important. Their association with the monopolistic match, I think, has brought a lot of questions, particularly in the hospitality industry, over great promises about occupancies and achieve rates. But ultimately, it was actually a little damaging to our reputation because they marked up already what was not a low season rate, but a high season rate. And that created the impression that it wasn't necessarily good value for money. And then I think, curiously, over issue management, they're normally superb. But come the one issue about on-field technology, they got that wrong as well. So I think I'd probably give them 7.5.
Oh, well, they gave us 9.
Okay, so we've got a 7.5, Michael.
Yeah, I was in the 7.5 to 8 kind of category. I thought they did a superb job if you look at the global awareness of FIFA through the tournament. Not just South Africa, which we'll talk about, but in terms of FIFA, global awareness, brand meaning, brand affinity, brand loyalty. They're a very strong brand. Everybody wants to be associated with FIFA. You can't, as a broadcaster or as a sponsor, you can't get close enough to FIFA. So I think they have that, and they've built that through the 2010 tournament. But I agree with Paul. I think there's some of the issues that perhaps they didn't handle as well as they could have. I think the Jabulani ball incident, for example, and all the issues raised about the ball, that must come into FIFA's court, and they must think hard about how they manage that process. And that takes a little bit away from the brand equity that they've built up with their customers. I agree with the technology on the field. I think the other issue is perhaps a question of the quality of the games. And that comes down to where football is at the moment and the work FIFA did with all the federations in coming together for this tournament. And so some of the broadcasters have been talking about the quality of the football wasn't great, the number of goals that were on offer during 2010. And I think some of those issues reduce slightly the brand power of FIFA during this tournament.
You could add to that some of the refereeing issues as well. There was some heavy-handedness where some of the referees, where the game didn't flow. I think there could have been some words there as well.
Rob, what would you score?
Well, again, I mean, the word that comes to mind is efficiency. I mean, they are totally efficient. I think Paul gave a fantastic overview there. There are typically South African scenarios where, as you say, we could have been different cultural experiences within the stadiums. But having said that, the stadiums were run really efficiently. You didn't have to wait for a beer. You didn't have to wait in a queue anywhere. But again, a fantastic job and really, all goods. Give them a 7.5, 8.
Great.
Let's also just one last point. Their CSI programs are also superb. Their Football for Hope, their outreach programs, I think they went a huge distance there.
I think they did, and if you speak to Federico Arieci and you went to Alex and you looked at the festival, I think you certainly got a sense of, I mean, they invest just less than 1% of their turnover, which is more than most countries do, and they're almost a country by themselves. But the challenge is that I don't think that story was picked up strongly enough by the broadcasters. Federico ran around in the last week doing lots and lots of interviews, but I think if you look at the discourse of FIFA and the tournament, that CSR element didn't come through strongly enough, and so perhaps they're an opportunity lost for a great story for them to tell, which perhaps wasn't made strongly enough.
And I've got one other question as well. They brought in their systems, but how much transfer of skills did they actually do? Are we now equipped to run as efficient a tournament without FIFA as with them? And I think we can't answer that yet.
Yeah.
Good question.
But I think we'll answer that soon when we, for example, when we go after Soccer City for the Tri-Nations.
Paul, you touched on the Bavaria incident, and Michael, you've actually written an article about that, about the ambush marketing. Give us your insight in terms of, was it really ambush marketing?
It absolutely was. It was a wonderful case for us to sit back and laugh and enjoy, the goings on in terms of the ambush marketing. But it certainly was classic ambush marketing, trying to intrude, trying to take advantage of the broadcast coverage that others had paid for, that Bavaria had not paid for. They certainly orchestrated and organized it in a way that tried to take advantage, and they knew it was illegal from the minute they planned it. And so, it's been building for a few years. If you look at the Dutchie dress incident, the whole idea of the Dutchie dresses, the way it's promoted in the Netherlands, with Sylvie van der Vaart, who is kind of like the Beckhams, the couple. Raphael van der Vaart plays in the Dutch team. She's, the Mrs. Beckham equivalent. She's a model in the Netherlands. She was made of a big campaign as part of Bavaria. They've been doing the striptease where groups of girls go into a game, following the Dutch games, and doing the striptease and getting it on camera and putting it on YouTube. And so you can see, even before the Dutch-Denmark game where this happened during the World Cup, you could go and see what they were planning to do.
But the fact is, if FIFA didn't do anything about it, they wouldn't have gotten this huge PR exposure.
They wouldn't have. I agree. They wouldn't have got as much Twitter and internet and PR exposure and discussion about it as they would have. But they may have achieved some of their other objectives because it would have been recorded and they would have used it internally in the Dutch market. Certainly, the heavy-handed approach of FIFA is an interesting one to look at. FIFA had to respond, and any commercially minded person would say that they absolutely had to respond. How they respond is interesting, though, and many people in that first week after the two girls were locked up, etc., thought that they were a bit heavy-handed and perhaps it was shifting towards Bavaria, and Bavaria were getting more out of it. But in the end, the out-of-court settlement was a landmark out-of-court settlement. 12 years of brand protection that FIFA got from Bavaria, and Bavaria signed on the dotted line. So I think at the end of the day, FIFA walked away having their marketing rights very secure, sending a very strong message to anyone for any future tournament that FIFA is going to make sure that the country they host their events in will have the legislative framework in place, and the brands will be secure. And I think that's a big takeaway.
Yeah. Well, Paul, what about the Kulula one? Weren't they being petty with it?
Yeah, I keep thinking back of that incident there was with breweries a couple of years back when they took on that T-shirt business, Laugh It Off, about the Black Label rip-off. And out of it, they were absolutely right in what they did, and they got exactly the same thing. They got the ruling. But the reputational damage was quite interesting because they haven't lost any value, but a brand like FIFA will always struggle to be your friend. Like breweries struggles sometimes to be your friend as well. But ultimately, by the heavy-handed approach, I think they did damage. Now, Kulula was a classic Nando's type of case study, just right on the thing, stick close to the edge, and completely I agree with you. But they can hit and run the whole way, and the Kulula technique, you speak to Gidon Novik, he loves this sort of stuff because the media covers it, they amplify it. You've almost done them more of a service by doing it. So you're in this dilemma. Part of you says, legally, I should challenge these people, sort it out, keep my line. The other half says, hang on a minute, by doing it, I'm giving them more kudos, but potentially I'm also positioning myself as being big, bad, lack of humor, big brother. Yeah. And I think that's the interesting situation. And of course, we got involved as South Africa because our police force had to enforce it because we signed the 17 guarantees, one of which absolutely unequivocally tells us that we have to protect their intellectual properties. So we got a bit of damage in that as well, and the Dutch government weren't so happy with our sort of Department of Foreign Affairs. So you've got some interesting dynamics. It was a small incident.
That's got two sides, though, because perhaps some would walk away and say, gosh, South Africa is a place where the rule of law stands.
And I think properties protected.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like some developing economies, I think we've walked away with a positive out of that as well.
Let's look at the rules. Rob, do you think the rules were fair at the end of the day?
Look, I think people invest a lot of funds to be associated with the FIFA World Cup. So I think these sponsors and advertisers need an element of protection. So I think we just mentioned that there was a lot of heavy-handed manner, the way in which these things have been dealt with. But at the end of the day, people are investing large sums of marketing funds to be associated with the event. And so I think they are fair.
Okay,
Don't
let's
think
leave
they're
it
too
there.
And everyone knows the terms of engagement. You know, when you get into this thing, you know what the
You know
deal
what you're in
is.
for.
I think a more interesting question is going to be, did the sponsors make enough of the opportunities they had
And
themselves?
that we're going to discuss in our next show. So let's leave it there for now, gentlemen.